Hi, I'm Mike Mangeot. I'm Commissioner of Tourism for the state of Kentucky. I've been in the tourism industry about 20 years. It's my third stint in the department. I was deputy commissioner a while back, and this is my second term as commissioner. In between there, I was the tourism director in Bardstown, Kentucky, the bourbon capital of the world. Bardstown is a great place. It's a very small community and of about 13,000 people, but for 50 plus years, it's been known as the bourbon capital of the world. There are 11 distilleries within 16 miles of the downtown. That includes world famous distilleries like Jim Beam, Maker's Mark, Four Roses, but they also have some newer distilleries like Bardstown Bourbon Company, Willett, Lux Row, and many others that are coming in, and it's really just boomed. You know, it's the location of kind of our, you've heard of My Old Kentucky Home possibly when they sing it at the Kentucky Derby. The My Old Kentucky Home State Park, and that property is in Bardstown. So you've really seen an evolution over the years of it being more of a very small town to really the leader in bourbon tourism in Kentucky, and I'd dare say almost the world. Well, the thing you have to remember, bourbon has to be made in the United States. Can't be made anywhere else and be called bourbon. Kentucky makes 95% of all the bourbon in the world. We currently have 11.4 million barrels of bourbon aging in Kentucky. And put that in perspective, the barrels are about 3 feet high. So if you lay them end to end, that would run from New York to Tokyo, and we would have more barrels left. So it's an amazing amount. And the reason why Kentucky kind of became that stronghold is we had a lot of Scottish distillers come in through the Cumberland Gap when Kentucky was the western frontier. They brought their distillation knowledge. And with that, part of the deal when you came to Kentucky back then is you when you agreed to buy land, you had to agree to also raise a certain amount of corn. Well, to store the corn throughout the year, they turned their distillation into it and started making a corn-based whiskey, which bourbon has to be at least 51% corn. But Kentucky is ideal for it for a number of reasons. One, we have 4 distinct seasons. You can't add any water or, any flavorings or colorings to bourbon. All of that comes from the liquid going in and out of the wood through the 4 seasons. When it's hot, it pushes the juice out. When it's cold, it brings it back through that char layer, and that gives it about 80% of its flavor and all of the color. So that, plus with the fact that we sit on a limestone shelf. Limestone is a natural filter for water. It filters out iron. You cannot make good tasting whiskey, any whiskey, if there's iron in the water. So all of that kind of leads to why Kentucky became the center point. And then from there, it just became, we make a really good product. You know, as I said, 95% of all the bourbon in the world, and I think 100% of all the good bourbon in the world. The first distiller in Kentucky was actually a Baptist preacher named Elijah Craig. And again, who was first and everything is kind of part of the lore. There's a lot of different stories that the different distilleries used. But I will say, after Prohibition, Jim Beam was probably the first one to get back up and running following Prohibition. I think it was about 90 days from the time that Prohibition ended to where he was up and distilling again. And since then, again, that was a centerpiece of the distilling industry. So that knowledge base, those workers were still there. They were able to get them back up and running once again. I'll tell you about the Bardstown Bourbon Company. And Bardstown Bourbon Company really was a game changer for the distilling industry as well as the tourism industry in Bardstown. When they came in, they were invited in or announced their project, I should say, in 2014. Began construction and started producing in 2016. And they're a contract distiller, so they produce about 50 different mash bills or recipes for various companies while their own product was being aged. And keep in mind, with bourbon, it has to age a minimum of 2 years. So it takes a while for that product to come out. And the longer it stays in the barrel, many times it's a better taste. But what Bardstown Bourbon Company did is they really looked at it much differently. When you walk into their facility, it's very modern. They opened the very first restaurant on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, which was incredibly out of the box thinking for the distilleries. They also serve all bourbons. They serve a curated wine list. They serve beer. And it really was just, let this be a gathering place for people no matter where they're going, because they don't mind you visiting other distilleries. They encourage you to go visit other distilleries and learn the history and the stories behind each of those. But what they did, and they did it in such a great fashion and at such a high level, is it made our other distilleries, not just in Bardstown, but throughout the state, really rethink how they were marketing and what that visitor experience was. And it led to multi-million-dollar investments in the visitor experience alone at Jim Beam, at Maker's Mark, at Heaven Hill, and so many others. And as the newer distilleries are coming online, like Preservation Distillery in Bardstown or Lux Row in Bardstown, they're having to think, okay, we're just not going to set up a queue and people can come in and take a tour. What are they doing while they're here? Maybe they don't have time for a tour because they've done 2 or 3 others and they just want to do a tasting. So you're seeing, because of Bardstown Bourbon's being a catalyst for this, now these different curated experiences, whether it's a cocktail class instead of a tour at Bardstown Bourbon Company, or now you can get crafted cocktails on site instead of just coming in and taking a sip of, an ounce of bourbon. They're doing food and bourbon tastings. People don't think about food pairings with bourbon like they do with wine. And there are some very distinct and incredibly delicious food pairings with chocolate or Kentucky country ham, which would be like a prosciutto or something along those lines. And I'm always learning different things. And of course, the different bourbons bring out different flavors in each of those products. So there's a lot of difference going. We call it the Napification of bourbon, where you saw in California where it was just really the wine aficionados who went out first, and now you go out there for wellness. You go out there for the culinary side, and that's where Bardstown specifically, but the rest of Kentucky is really growing with the bourbon tourism. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival is over 30 years old, and really was founded locally because there were so many distilleries and so many families in the community involved in the distilling industry, as a way to celebrate the industry locally. And over the years, it has really grown into a premier worldwide event. There are visitors that come and attend from over 30 countries annually. They mark it on their calendars to come in. And it did predate a lot of this explosive growth. It started out as just a local festival, and now, as I said, it's an internationally acclaimed festival. And now you see other festivals throughout the year that are tying into bourbon. In Louisville, Kentucky, our largest city, which is about 35 minutes to the north of Bardstown, they have a huge music festival called Bourbon and Beyond. And it's a 4-day music festival, world-class events. Bruno Mars is the headliner this year. I think the Foo Fighters last year, now I can't remember who it was last year, Chris Stapleton, pardon me, a Kentuckian, by the way. And they're tying in with bourbon. And what bourbon has done more than anything besides the production of it with bourbon tourism, now you're seeing it really filter out into our culinary even more. So many restaurants now will incorporate bourbon into their product, into their menus. Bourbon tour companies that when you're traveling around and drinking bourbon, you probably shouldn't be driving. So now these bourbon tour companies have popped up and are going out. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we couldn't really sell a luxury travel option to Kentucky, and now you can. Because the hotel properties that have come in have really upped their game in many instances. The distilleries offer single barrel selections sometimes, where you, your company, or a group of people, friends, can come in and you buy an entire barrel that is yours and the tasting part of it. And that's an expensive proposition. So they want to treat you right when they come in. So we have some distilleries like Log Still Distilling, and also just outside of Bardstown, a newer one that has cabins on site where you can come in and rent those cabins and stay. They have about a 2,500 seat amphitheater, so they're bringing in well-known musical acts throughout the summer for small concerts. It's very exciting to see the new approach that folks are coming in and looking at in their visitor experience. And I do attribute a lot of that to Bardstown Bourbon Company and their initial investment and kind of game-changing mentality. Kentucky Bourbon Trail was established in 1999 as a way to collectively market bourbon. It really began, the distilleries at that time, most of them were not in the tourism business. They looked at it as more of a loss leader, for lack of a better way of saying it, brand loyalty. Someone would come in and knock on the front door and say, I'd like to take a tour, and they may find somebody and say, give these folks a tour. Well, now when you go there, the growth in that it has been amazing over the last few years. A lot of that has been helped by the fact that we can now changes in laws where they can now serve cocktails, the food I talked about. We can ship to some states if you buy a bottle there. And all of those changes have really helped grow that. There are, I think, over 65 of our distilleries are a part of either the Heritage Trail, which is the larger bourbon trail, or our small craft distillers. And that's what you have to keep in mind. When you look at a Jim Beam, which is the world's largest bourbon producer, does probably 8 million cases a year. Then you've got some that are producing 2 barrels a week. And depending on, it just gives you a good idea of the differences in the approach. But the Bourbon Trail encompasses all that. They are approaching about 2 million visits, I should say, per year. And it's just been a game changer for us.